From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
After years of debate, political tension, and promises of thousands of new jobs, the Gotion battery plant planned for mid-Michigan is officially dead.
The electric vehicle battery project was once touted as a cornerstone of Michigan's clean energy future, and it was backed by hundreds of millions of dollars in state incentives.
But controversy over the company's ties to China, local pushback, and months of stalled progress has led the state to end the nearly $2.5 billion project. So what went wrong, and what does the fallout mean for Michigan's strategy to lure big investments in a divided political climate? Bridge Michigan reporters Jordan Hermany and Paula Gardner have been covering the Gotion story from the beginning, and they are here now. Paula, Jordan, hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Paula, I want to start with you. You've covered the state's economic incentive program for years, and there is this constant back and forth about the importance of and the need for these state incentives to lure big projects to the state in order to grow Michigan's economy. Why is it important?
Well, I think some people think it's very important to the state's economy, and other people do not think it's important to the state's economy because they look to the results of economic development incentives and see some fluctuation and maybe some unintended consequences of a lot of the spending. But what economic developers will tell you, and often what the average person will say, is that Michigan does have to compete. And Michigan should be out there trying to find new jobs because we know that we do not have enough high-paying jobs here. And I think we're worried as a state about the direction of, say, our manufacturing employment and the opportunities that are spread across the state for employment and in communities.
So, Paula, for those folks who are in favor of economic incentives, who see that as the future, at least to help create a new manufacturing future in Michigan, how was Gotion going to fit into that?
Gotion is interesting to me because I feel like it kind of slid in. It was in a place in Mecosta County around Big Rapids where, we're not used to seeing the major economic development deals. It wasn't Grand Rapids, it wasn't Metro Detroit, and it happened with another large-scale development, Our Next Energy project, one day in the fall. And it also was part of SOAR, which was the Strategic Outreach and Attraction Reserve, which is the multi-billion-dollar incentive plan that Governor Whitmer and the bipartisan legislature approved. And the first award happened in early 22, and then Gotion and this other award came towards the end of 22. And it felt enormous at the time in some ways, but it was also a little bit distant. It was in an area a lot of people weren't really familiar with. There also was no controversy immediately, at least that became immediately apparent. It happened, and it seemed like everything was rolling ahead and everything was kind of in place to make this one of the successful projects that Michigan could look back on from that time and say, great, everything was put into motion and here's what we delivered. And then it fell apart.
So what happened?
The community that was the home of Gotion immediately became split, but they didn't find their voice for a few months. But the fissure started to grow. And then the attention turned to how Gotion is an American version of a Chinese battery company. So while its headquarters is in the U.S. and the employees who were heading this initiative here were based here for a long time, there were the ties to the Chinese, and China was not favored at that time. There was a very tense relationship between the U.S. and China, and people dug into that. At the same time as the community was saying, why would you build this here? This is too big. We don't want it. Why did you keep it secret? All of those questions kind of coalesced into this big movement against Gotion. Once that started, it really snowballed, and it was very hard for Gotion and the people who supported Gotion to get ahead of that.
Paula, one consistent thread was the concern over Gotion's ties to China, perceptions over national security. How significant was that? I mean, it ended up being talked about during last year's race for president, versus, as you noted, the local concerns about the environment and land use in helping to actually derail this project.
That concern about China is what elevated it into a national conversation. The candidates were able to get a lot of steam from the Chinese component, and that carried into the presidential election when people were pointing to this as an example of, look, you're giving money to the Chinese to create jobs here. What's wrong with that picture? And I think otherwise it would have just stayed local or perhaps regional.
I mean, it's kind of surprising, Paula, that usually when you've got a remote rural area, jobs are a big deal. How did these other concerns trump, no pun intended, the jobs factor and bringing in economic development to a community?
I visited that area in early 23, and it was truly split. And the people who were against it talked about the scale. It was very hard to imagine a place where a factory might have 50 workers. It might be a food factory with 100 workers nearby where people would drive 20 minutes or 30 minutes to get to work. It was very hard to imagine 2,350 people working in a massive factory. And they would look and say, who among us is going to get these jobs? Who among us is going to be hurt because their workers are going to take those jobs, leaving no workers for these other places? And just questions like that, I think, really drove a wedge between the intent, which I think I truly believe that some of the people who were proponents of this factory had no idea there would be this kind of blowback, even on the economic level, much less the China level.
That's Paula Gardner, business reporter at Bridge, Michigan. And Jordan Hermany, state politics reporter for Bridge, is here too. So, Jordan, I want to turn to you now to talk about the politics surrounding the end of Gotion and what comes next. But first, could you set the political table for us? What is the sense right now about economic incentives from the state capitol?
Well, I think Paula hit the nail on the head earlier when she mentioned it. It really does depend on who you ask. But I will say personally, from covering SOAR from the beginning, I have never seen an issue that could unite the most conservative of conservative Republicans and the most liberal of liberal Democrats. So that kind of sets the tone right there for the overall wonkiness of SOAR, which is there are people who believe that handing out these corporate incentives to big businesses to come site in Michigan, the argument being that other states are already doing this. Ohio, for example, offering incentives. So why would a business want to come to Michigan if it knows it can get better tax breaks, a better deal in Ohio, advocating for SOAR to be in effect for us to remain competitive for these kinds of things? But you talk to those in opposition to it, they say that that money could be better spent on the actual Michigan taxpayer. And, if we go back, Paula specifically did a real, if I do say so myself, a bang up job of a report back in April where we dug into these kinds of corporate subsidies. And since Whitmer has taken office, she's actually doled out about $1 billion in corporate incentives. It's about $995 million to 102 companies, which have just created a little over 13,000 jobs, which is about 5 times fewer than the number of jobs that they were supposed to create in the first place. So there's a growing body of evidence to support that these incentives aren't necessarily delivering on the promises that they're offering. And more lawmakers, I believe we even had one during budget talks, Dylan Wagella, who's a Democrat out of Garden City, outright tell our reporters that nobody was advocating to keep SOAR in the budget this time around. And I think people are looking towards something else, not necessarily doing away with economic development incentives in its entirety, but absolutely reforming what those could look like in Michigan moving forward.
Right. You mentioned Dylan Wagella, who doesn't just identify as a liberal or a progressive. He identifies as a democratic socialist. So we've got these strange bedfellows. Do the left, the progressives, and the right conservatives, do they have similar reasons for opposing these incentives, or are they on different tracks leading to the same destination?
As much as I hate to give this kind of answer, it is a little a column A, a little a column B. When I talked with House Speaker Matt Hall last week about it, he did bring up, as for instance, Wigella has brought up before, the concern over use of taxpayer dollars and whether those could go back to more taxpayer-focused things. But Hall also mentioned, with respect to Goshen or these other kind of bigger mega sites, that they can come in and absolutely disrupt the fabric of a community. They're going out into these kind of smaller farming areas, they're a little more rural, and they're buying up massive plots of land, drastically changing what people who have come to live in those communities have expected out of those communities. And so you do have varying reasons across the board, be that fiscal or physical, for opposing these sorts of things.
Jordan, you noted Matt Hall, the speaker, he brought up economic development incentives during a press conference last week. He says it's something he's interested in. At the same point, there was no new money in the SOAR fund. Again, that's the state's Strategic Outreach and Attraction Reserve Fund in this new budget that was just passed. So are there actual policy options here on the table?
Yeah, so mentioning Hall, he told me that he has a couple ideas, and obviously these are all kind of still in the works. This is just the House Speaker speaking for his own personal ones. He laid out a couple ways of how he sees SOAR being redeveloped, no pun intended, I suppose. And one of the main things that he stressed to me was that he would like to see a sort of program that incentives are awarded to businesses only if you perform and actually can deliver. So instead of these upfront payments that we're seeing now with SOAR, which is what happened, with Goshen, instead of saying, hey, we'll give you this money up front, you'll deliver on the back end with all of these jobs, we hope. Instead saying, hey, you show us these jobs, you show us everything that you're able to do, and then we'll give you the incentives that were promised to you. He also floated doing away with mega site funding, which the name as it implies, these are these big sites, about 1,000 acres or more, that are used for large-scale industrial projects. He also mentioned to us revising state regulations. Didn't really get into much of what that would he want that to look like, but it kind of seemed like there was a lot of things on the table, a lot of things open for discussion, and a lot of people interested in reforming this process while making sure that we still remain competitive, especially with our Midwestern neighbors when it comes to siting large-scale industrial projects.
You go back to 1992 when Republican Governor John Engler said state government shouldn't be picking winners and losers in the marketplace, that we're not going to turn to incentives. And then in 1992, General Motors defied expectations, at least in Michigan, and said that it was going to close its plant in Willow Run and move production to Arlington, Texas. And that just changed everything. That the state has been entrenched in this economic incentives, let's put them out there ever since. So, Jordan, as you noted, there's this arm race between the states. Now we've got Republican State Representative Brian Postumus, who has this idea that maybe states can drop out of that arms race and create a compact to not offer incentives, that you compete on other things. Does this have any legs?
That's a great question. I mean, I think of something that Rep. Jay DeBoer, who's chair of the House Oversight Committee, said earlier this year with respect to SOAR funding, where he noted that eventually you're not going to be able to write a big enough check. Eventually, there's just not going to be enough money that Michigan can offer if other states are going to be offering money in return. So the concept of a compact, while admirable, I do struggle to see other states acknowledging that if they're benefiting from this, if these bigger businesses are coming to them instead of siting in Michigan, what kind of incentive do they have for signing on to this? It really does just remain to be seen. And especially when we talk about economic development and economic development policy, I mean, sky's the limit at this point, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'd just add some of the programs, some of the situations that we could be facing soon with like a tax credit, a payroll tax credit, that's still public money. That is somebody earning money, and instead of paying their share to the government, they're paying their share to a business. So some of the things that are going to be on the table are still going to be unpalatable to somebody like Dylan Wegela, who doesn't believe that public money should be used for this sort of a thing. So I think there are a lot of gyrations that Michigan will have to go through to deal with that. And I'll also add, I watched General Motors leave Ypsilanti Township. Ypsilanti Township has not recovered. They've made a lot of steps towards that. They have grown in many respects, but the actual wages that they lost from General Motors leaving, they have not recovered. And I think that could stand as an example to Michigan about, when you put all of your eggs in one basket or in one industry, that maybe you're closing yourself to opportunities to grow and expand in other ways.
That's Paula Gardner, business reporter at Bridge, Michigan. Jordan Hermany, politics reporter, also at Bridge, Michigan. Together, they have been reporting on Gotion leaving Michigan after a huge economic incentive deal. And we also noted your earlier reporting, Paula. You were on It's Just Politics earlier this year when your piece came out. Whitmer subsidy record, companies get $1 billion, jobs fall short of promises. We are going to link to all of this reporting on the website, michiganpublic.org/itsjustpolitics. Thanks so much, you two.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And finally, before we wrap for the day, an update on the 9 bills.
The 9 bills.
These are the bills that were passed in the last legislative session under complete Democratic control, but they were never sent to Governor Whitmer for her signature.
Senate Democrats sued Republican House Speaker Matt Hall because they were in his possession, saying he must send those bills to the governor.
As It's Just Politics newsletter readers know, months ago, a Michigan Court of Claims judge ruled that, yes, the speaker should transmit the bills, but she did not order the House to send the bills to the governor's desk.
Judge Seema Patel cited concerns about breaching the separation of powers between the judicial and legislative branches. Senate Democrats appealed, and this week, the Court of Appeals ruled the House must send the 9 bills to Governor Whitmer's desk.
We are going to explore the court's rationale and the possibility,
the likelihood
that this case could make its way all the way up to the Michigan Supreme Court. We are going to dig into the case of the 9 bills in this week's It's Just Politics newsletter. You can sign up now at michiganpublic.org, and it will be in your inbox Friday afternoon. And that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again next week.